All right, let's rewind one more time as I noticed my mute button was on. Warren Martin is our guest here. My name is Jason Spees. We're going to our Zoom line here as I got my wires crossed on a Friday morning, Warren. I've been up since 3 a.m. and you've been running several conferences. You've got an award to talk about. You've been working with Dennis Quaid and PBS, and it's Earth Month. We have to get to that, but let's start with KIOGA, KIOGA, Kansas, oil,
Independent.
gas. Okay, I was going to ask Indiana, maybe
Yeah.
Illinois, maybe one of those partnering states, because sometimes you have to do that if you're a small school or a state that doesn't necessarily produce as much as Texas or something like that. So let's do a little bit of a State of the Union, man. Kansas, where are you
Yeah.
guys at? How is the independence going? Let's give your independence an opportunity to let the world know what's going on at KIOGA.
Yeah, we had a great time at KIOGA and actually had two conferences going at the same time. I was at Leadership Kansas yesterday morning, went to KIOGA the rest of the day, and going back to Leadership Kansas today. So it's been a busy couple days for us here. But the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association represents predominantly the western side of Kansas, where you have deeper wells. You don't have as much water flood as you do on the eastern side of the state. But we had a really good conversation, and during my presentation, the one thing that I really hit on that I think some of the people in Kansas didn't even know is, Kansas is the 11th or 12th, depending on what day you look at the statistics, 11th or 12th leading state in oil and gas production right now. But it's more significant than that. What we're talking about with the price of oil being as low as it is, with the impacts that are coming from the changing of our funding system under the Trump administration, that's really impacting marginal wells. And marginal wells are a significant part of the oil and gas industry, and we have a lot of marginal wells here in Kansas. It's
What's a
impacting.
marginal well to the layman?
So a marginal well is a well that produces 15 barrels of oil per day or less.
Okay.
And so marginal wells account for 15% of overall oil production in the United States. And if you take that 15% of oil production offline, we're no longer the leading producer of oil in the world. And so it's a significant chunk of the oil and gas industry. And what a lot of people don't understand is the number one state that leads in the most marginal wells is Texas. But Texas could lose all of its marginal wells and still be doing just fine because it has a lot of big oil that is in Texas that would still be in existence if marginal wells were taken off the map.
Now,
And
are these predominantly known as stripper wells?
stripper wells, yes, yes,
Stripper wells,
uh-huh,
okay. And
yeah,
so, and that's primarily what Kansas is for the most part, as you're saying?
yeah. And I usually use the term marginal well because a stripper well really applies to someone who is out drilling wells and working the wells and the way that they work the wells. That's very understandable to someone who works on wells. Marginal is more understandable to a layperson because lay people understand margins. And when you have smaller margins, it's harder to do business, and any change in the business itself really impacts whether you're able to stay in business or not, whether a well is still profitable or not. And while Texas has the most marginal wells, Kansas has the second most marginal wells of all states in the United States. So, and by proportion, the number of wells that are marginal wells compared to the total number of wells in the state, we're number one. We have more marginal wells per capita than any other state in the United States. So whatever's going to impact marginal wells is going to impact Kansas first. It kind of makes us that battleground state when it comes to marginal wells or stripper wells that are there. And so we talked a little bit about that and how that really makes Kansas a very significant place to have a lot of these conversations because it's going to impact our entire state first. And so that kind of puts us on that forefront.
Well, it's interesting too because several reasons is in my head, I'm kind of making the joke a little bit about how the shift in language that's happened from stripper well to marginal well not only is more descriptive to the end kind of description, but it gets away from a trigger word.
Yeah.
And stripper is a trigger word and has a very promiscuous connotation, if you will. And to really veer away from that with the oil and gas industry, you can make a joke out of it, but on the other hand, you're being completely serious. And we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit about you get an award for changing the conversation. And quite honestly, whether you did it by hook or by crook or by accident or by purpose, that is a real life example of trying to change the conversation by using some different words that could be trigger words now, which used to be extremely descriptive back in the day. In
Right.
fact, I've been covering the oil and gas industry for 13 years now, and one of the first years, there's only one year, so it was the second year. Now that I'm thinking about it, I was out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where they had one of their annual albino elk conferences. Right, it's only the people that are like albino elk. They're a rare sighting. They come together, they fly in, they do their talks, and like we're talking Federal Reserve people, we're talking CEOs and all these other things. And their keynote speaker was a gentleman from the gas industry, specifically Southwest Gas. I want to say he was the CEO from there. Anderson maybe was the last name, and I apologize because I'm going off memory and I'm getting a little bit older. But he flat out said that if they would have hired Madison Avenue and paid them top dollar to come up with a word that could work against the oil and gas industry, they would have came up with the word frack, and we did it to ourselves. And that
Yeah.
was kind of my first introduction to that. And I thought, oh, good, here's some open-minded people. And then I found out, well, the industry is not as open-minded as maybe
Right.
some of the people on top. So we'll talk about that in a little bit too as well, because that's a very important part to what we need to talk about. But I did want to ask you about the gas part of it. You said it's mostly on the western side, not the eastern side. All the population is on the eastern side, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So now we're on the west side where Dodge City is maybe, and
Yep.
some of those other old western towns. What kind of gas do you have? In North Dakota, for example, it's a wet gas. So you're getting 5, 6, 7 different molecules, if you will, butane, pentane,
Right.
all these different types of tanes, right? But down in Texas, it's more of a dry gas. So maybe you're only getting 3 of those
Yeah.
different tanes and molecules. What's Kansas gas like? What is that?
Well, we have a very interesting state because we have oil wells that are exclusively oil wells. We have gas wells that are exclusively gas wells. Then we have wells that are oil and gas, depending on which region of the state. So we have a little bit of everything. But we have the Hugoton gas field, one of the largest gas fields in the world historically, but has been producing gas for right at 100 years now, has been producing gas there. So our rate of decline is increasing as we continue to pump that gas out of that field. So we got a little bit of a mix across the state when it comes to gas. We got one line that comes out of the Hugoton that goes through a helium processing plant. So we're pulling some helium out of that as well. So we got a little bit of everything here in the state.
Helium, of course, is a big medical commodity,
Medical.
correct?
Yep, that's
Yeah,
correct.
that's
Yes.
what I thought. And
Yeah.
balloons too, for those people who like to go to birthday
Yeah.
parties and hire clowns.
But people aren't paying the high dollars for helium for the balloons. They're
No,
paying
they're
for it
not.
for the
No, they're
medical
not.
usage. A lot of our medical innovations that we have just could not exist without that helium. And so it's made it a very precious commodity at this point in time.
So you have a little bit different of some obstacles and issues, if you will, in Kansas. One being just the fact of the oil and gas industry under attack on a local, state, and federal level, and then even the nonprofit NGO level too. Now we're starting to find out as some of the transparency is coming out. But you've got a small business issue that also
Right.
couples with the oil and gas. And the trifecta is that a lot of the oil and gas industry funds education, funds local community centers, funds artistic projects, paleontologists, certain archaeological careers that wouldn't exist without the oil and gas industry for surveying and et cetera, et cetera. What's going on with the small business then? Because my guess is you're right on the pulse with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, here in Kansas, we have over 2,000 producers here in the state. That's why it's the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. We have the largest gathering of independent producers of any region in the United States. There's really no big oil that does any production here in the state. It's all independents. The average oil company in Kansas has 3 employees. So it is very much small business here. And so small business, we have that added component of it's not just a matter of what the Trump administration's policies are doing towards the overall oil and gas industry, because those are predominantly focused on major oil companies and their major oil company production. The kind of the extra component that hits us is on the fact that we haven't got the tax relief that Trump kind of ran on, and we haven't seen the deregulation that has taken place that Trump ran on. And because those two things haven't hit us, we're getting hit like small businesses are across the United States, in addition to all the hits that are coming with the low price of oil and all the other factors that are impacting the greater oil and gas industry. And so it's kind of that double whammy where, it would be a whole lot easier if we could get some movement on the tax side of it. If we could get some movement on the deregulation side of it, that would greatly help the independents here in Kansas.
How about the state? Where's the state at with that? It's interesting to see the last 20 years
Hmm.
how the state has really changed their role when it
Hmm.
comes to energy or just anywhere in the economy, really.
Yeah.
Uh, look at North Dakota, look at Wyoming. I see Louisiana starting to morph into this as well, where you have so much research dollars now going into public-private partnerships or NGOs or whatever the case is, but it's coming from the state, and
Right.
it's going to a entity that primarily works with corporations.
Yeah.
Really, at the end of the day, and and that's not an opinion. That's a fact based on their time. Who do they
Hmm.
spend their time with? Who do they go to their meetings with? Who gets the access to the information that the public is paying for? How does that work in Kansas? Like you mentioned, there's no big producers there.
Right.
In North Dakota, for example, you walk into NDSU and there's a giant Cargill logo in one of the boardrooms.
Right.
So obviously, North Dakota State and their ag department works very close with Cargill,
Right.
and that sort of thing. So this happens in other areas. So I'm not trying to point fingers or cause any problems here, but there are unintended consequences to small businesses.
Yeah.
Small business used to be the innovator out in the marketplace. They were the little ships driving around with the big corporate vessel. Then they'd buy them up. But now it
Yeah.
just seems like that the government is playing a different role here. And with
Yeah.
Kansas, man, you guys are probably the canary in the coal mine again, just like you were back in World War II, or was it
Yep.
World War One?
Well, both of them, but World War One was the bigger of the two
Okay,
for the,
all right.
the Kansas oil industry. But we actually have a pretty good standing here in the state. We have a really strong Republican majority, supermajority in both chambers here in the state. A lot of support from our representatives at the state level, not so much maybe from the governor's office, but definitely from the legislature's offices. We have a pretty strong support system that is there. They understand. I mean, when you're talking about Western counties, we got numerous counties out there that the number one source of income for that county is the oil and gas industry. So we do still have a significant role in the state, even though we don't have the PR department of a big oil company. We don't have, the driving force that those big oil companies have to go in and lobby and work with colleges and that kind of stuff. That's why Kansas Strong was created. Kansas Strong was created to give us a little bit more of that PR wing for all of the independents in the state to really have that conversation at that level. But when it comes to the legislature, we have a pretty strong support system here in the state for that. And so it's really that federal level that is curtailing what we're able to do here in the state. And that's where we really need to see that movement on the taxes. We need to see that movement on the deregulation. That would be a great help to the independent producers to be able to map out, a small business. It all comes down to cash flow. It all comes down to, your progression plan, being able to look at projects and plan out those projects. And that's hard to do when there's uncertainty about where's oil prices going to go, what deregulation is going to come, and what deregulation is not going to come. The Trump administration, it's been broadly broadcasted that methane is dead. The methane tax is dead. And that's just not the case. They wrote a law that took out one single component and it prohibits you from being able to formulate what a methane tax would be. So methane tax is gone for now, but any change in the administration or any change in Congress could easily overturn that with a 50% vote, 51% vote. And so it's not a certainty that goes beyond the next election. And so it's things like that where that deregulation is really kind of put the lack of deregulation has really kind of put things in limbo. And it's not at the state level where that's taking place. It's coming from those federal regulations that are kind of hampering us at this point. We have that support in the state.
Going to segue into wordsmithing, which is kind of, you mentioned with the methane definition and some of those different things. And when I think of the Gulf of America, one of the offshoot conversations is that this will open up new oil leases that didn't exist under the Gulf of Mexico, which I think is kind of funny. You change the wording. Hey, by the time the courts catch up, well, guess what? We've already drilled about 15 billion barrels. So tough, too bad, move on. Whether it's true or not, I have no idea, but it does show what language can do and how language really does impact a lot of what we do. And I do think there are some things happening within the Trump administration where language is going to set a whole new wave of things, whether it's through WOTUS, Waters of the United States, or whether it's through some leasing. I see that they're on the BLM and some of the federal land. They're changing some languages there too as well. We saw it years ago when they changed the definition of small business during COVID. Things get new definitions by the government because that's how they fund different things. Talk to me a little bit about the language and how you see this going forward for the industry. And we'll get into the award from there, because was that presented to you at KIOGA or at the Kansas leadership deal?
It was actually at neither one of those. It was at a separate event. It's presented by the Wichita Business Journal, and I'll just start out with that.
Great magazine, or great newspaper, by the way.
So we were given an award for innovation, and our innovation was changing the conversation about the oil and gas industry. And a lot of that is language. Certainly, that is what the Trump administration is trying to do at the federal level. It's what every legislator tries to do going forward. They come up with a policy and then they try and word it in such a way that the public will adhere to it. But even more than that, here in the United States, we don't live by the spirit of the law. We live by the letter of the law. And when you change the letters, that really impacts how that law is perceived, how it's understood, how it's adjudicated. And so that's an important thing. I think it's even more important when it comes to our conversation. And that's what we're trying to do with Kansas Strong, is really change that conversation. It is really hard to go into, we talked about it before. Oil and gas people love the term stripper well because there's all kinds of puns, there's all kinds of things that you can do. It makes you seem a little edgy to use that term within the industry. But that's where everybody supports you, is in the industry. When you get out into the real world, you want people to really understand what it is that you're dealing with and what you're going through. And they don't understand what a stripper well is, but they do understand what business margins are. And so that word really makes a difference. We try and do that in everyday conversation. When we go and have a conversation, we don't use talking points. I have a lot of people in our industry are like, hey, give me the top 5 talking points that I should be talking to my community about. And my response to them always is, which member of your community? Because it changes. If I'm talking to a teenager, I'm not going to be talking about margins. I'm not going to be talking about that type of stuff. I'm going to be talking about their gaming system and how their gaming system and their iPhone and their clothes are completely made by petroleum. And if we take away petroleum, what does that do for your lifestyle? What does that do for your experience? When I'm talking to a small community Rotary Club or Kiwanis Club, I'm talking about grocery prices. I'm talking about gas prices. I'm talking about the products that they use to do their business and where do they get those products from? How are they made? Because those are things that make the oil and gas industry not some industry that I know about, but a industry that is a part of my life that impacts me directly. And that's really where we have to change that conversation. And politicians try to do it, but most of the time they fail miserably. But you've got to bring it down to that individual person to where they're listening to that issue and understand this issue impacts me. It's not just something I have a stance on, it's something that literally impacts me directly. And that's where we're trying to change the conversation by removing it from the political, because when you get into the political, people just start getting further and further apart. When you bring it down to the personal, now we want to have a real conversation about, wait a minute, whoa, this is going to impact me? Okay, let's talk about this then. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what they gave us the award for, is that we have been very effective in changing that conversation, bringing it down to that personal level, making oil and gas not some industry out there, but something that's a part of every one of our lives, because it is. It is one of the biggest factors that impacts individual economics that exist in our world today.
Now, what kind of an award did you get presented? I'm going to do a little bit of a backhanded brag here. So after you tell me what you got, I'm going to tell you about an award I got and brag a little bit. So go
You're going to
ahead.
one up me. That's what you're going to do.
Well,
You're
maybe we'll see. We'll see.
okay. Yeah.
Wichita Business Journal. That's a pretty. I mean, if you got their attention, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was. We were very honored. This is the second innovation award we've got from them. The first one I got directly personally. Uh, I believe it was 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, right after I really started with Kansas Strong and kind of turned it around, rewrote how we do things, changed everything about how we operate, and I got an innovation award for how I was investing in our industry.
But was it a like was it a trophy or was it one of
Yeah,
those?
it's a plaque.
A plaque. Okay, a
Plaque. Yeah.
plaque. Okay, so it was a plaque.
And then this time on the Innovation Award, Kansas Strong itself got it as the whole organization, and we got it based on the fact that from they're a media company, and they understood from a media perspective that it was very innovative how we talk about the industry different than every other media source in the state. And they recognize that, so they gave us another plaque that says this is an innovative approach to communication about the oil and gas industry.
See, now I've not won an award like that, but the award I got was presented to me at a oil field conference by the mayor of Odessa, who was running for office, I think, the next year. And it was a bobblehead of me.
Oh.
And it was for all the positive work I've done for 10 years in the industry, because Warren, you know this. I mean, hey, we don't, if somebody's got a good story to tell on how they're changing the industry for the better, hey, come on, let's talk.
Yeah.
If it's something that you feel like you learned a lesson on, not that you screwed up on, something you learned a lesson on, well, come on. And so similar is what I'm saying, is that trying to change the conversation, coming at it in different ways, telling stories in different ways, bringing on a cafe owner to talk about how the oil and gas industry's impacted her and her family. Those are interviews that we used to do and still do. And so that still makes me laugh.
That's why you got a bobblehead right there.
That's exactly right, man. That's exactly right.
But I mean, you're one up at me because two life goals: one to be turned into a bobblehead, one to be turned into an action figure, and I've never had either one of them done.
That's
So
only
you up on
reason.
me there.
That's the only reason I bring it up because, I mean, here you got the nice corporate award that actually matters that you could put on a resume. And I got something that I could, put up on my desk and maybe in the background at times. But uh, anyway, so that's some good stuff. But, to show people the balance that's happening here, they might get a little bit focused on the relationship and the promotion that you're doing with, say, Glenn Beck,
Mhm.
because Glenn Beck is considered polarizing, but I like the term you use, which is he can activate an audience. So if you can give him a message that's not polarization, he's still going to get them to activate. But you also working with PBS, which is the
Right.
exact opposite of Glenn Beck on
Yeah.
on the political spectrum in terms of if you were going to go poll people on the street. So that to me is something I think that people need to look at more so instead of one side, look at are they balancing it out in some way? Are they making an attempt to do that? So, quickly, just kind of recap those different promotions that you have going on with Glenn Beck and also PBS.
Yeah, PBS, we're working with the show Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid. They reached out to us. Ironically, I think people are starting to catch the theme of what we're trying to do because the title of the show that they're doing is changing the conversation about oil and gas. And they wanted to really highlight how we were doing that as well, taking it into schools, taking it into the public, and how we're talking about it in a different way. And you're right, PBS is a very different conversation than what we're doing with Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck, we're doing a radio endorsement deal where he's going to endorse Kansas Strong and will try and activate people who are already supporters of our industry to go to a landing page that then will be an activation page that they can share our messaging, they can share social media posts and those types of things to help us by becoming advocates for our industry here in the state. And those are two very different ways of approaching it. And I think that that really highlights this idea behind changing the conversation. The idea behind changing the conversation is we live in a world where politicians, you can look at anyone from Donald Trump all the way to your local mayor. Every one of them says, their whole goal is to come out with a very strong message and say, this is my message, take it or leave it. This is who I am, take it or leave it. And where we're changing the conversation is we're going in and saying, it doesn't matter what my message is. Tell me about your life and let me share with you how our industry impacts your life. We're trying to change the conversation by, instead of it being, this is what we want to say, to really helping people understand this is what you need to know. And that's different for everybody. That's different for every audience. And that's really something that is kind of novel for a PR firm, because a PR firm, the very first thing I tell anyone who works with us, any marketing agency, any advertising agency, any ad campaign that we're working with, the very first thing that I tell them is we have zero interest in branding. We're not trying to come up with a brand. We are only about messaging. And that's really the change, is we want to have that conversation through messaging to the individual, because it doesn't matter what I think about oil and gas. What matters is, what do you think about it? And what information can I give you that gives you a better and greater understanding of that industry? And that's where that real change, and that's what allows us to go on to PBS, and it allows us to work with Glenn Beck, and allows us to work in a lot of different venues that other people would say, no, we're not having him. We're not having them come in, because we know where they stand. Because we try and make it about you. We try and make it about your concerns, your needs, and your future. And our whole goal is to enable people to pick the best energy future they possibly can. Because in the end of the day, it is the American people that are going to choose the energy future we have. And we're only going to choose as good of energy future as we can based on the information and the knowledge that the population has. And so that's why we see it as such a vital thing.
Changing the conversation is obviously something that needs to happen in a lot of different areas, and Earth Month is happening, and that is a great time to have the conversation. Now, a lot of the conversation lately has been about climate change, so that change, I guess, has been going on. For 13 years of the crude life, anyways, we've been highlighting how the oil and gas industry, in our opinion, is the leader in the environmental movement. And that was, that was something that was brought to my attention kind of by accident. Um, I don't know if you know this, Warren, but 13 years ago when I first got into this industry, I came from the east side of North Dakota and the west side of Minnesota. So we were all agriculture and government subsidies. We didn't have an oil well within 9 hours from us. And so 13 years ago was really kind of my first experience with it, and I embedded myself into the Bakken oil field by living out there and actually living in a food truck and interviewing people and working at the local station and being an active member in the community out in the Bakken oil field. And I went out there to investigate oil and gas, actually. I thought I was going to be, some Woodward and Bernstein type oil and gas because it was right in my backyard and all these other, and everybody was, doing cheerleading stuff. But then when I went out there, I didn't see oil and gas as the bad guy at all. I saw them as the bringer of opportunity. And now, don't get me wrong, just like every industry and every politician and every local area, you've got some greedy people and you've got some entitled people. And man, when they get together, that's a dangerous mixture. And that's probably oil and gas's biggest obstacle, to be honest, is some of the internal things happening. But my tune changed very quickly when I embedded myself out there and saw very quickly how the recycling water was working, how some of the on-site generation was happening, how the reclamation projects with the land, like I mentioned before, the archaeologists and some of the land surveyors and historical majors at universities would never even have a job if it wasn't for the oil and gas industry having respect and being a steward for the land. I think they're the leader in the environmental movement. It's Earth Month. It's a difficult conversation to have, Warren. I can have it within the industry and throw red meat to the wolves all day long, but having it outside of the industry it's been hard for 13 years, especially when I come out and I say, I believe the oil and gas industry is the leader in the environmental movement. You can hear a pin drop after that, Warren. How are you doing it out there with Earth Month? How's it going, man?
Well, I had a first this year for Earth Month. I actually spoke at a Rotary Club several months ago, and I make the same statement. I make the same statement that we are the leading industry in addressing environmental concerns. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And in response to that, there was a principal that happened to be listening at this Rotary Club and was listening. And he invited me, and this first time this had ever happened. I got invited to we have here in Kansas, environmental magnet schools. And they're schools that everything about the school, they have gardens, they have greenhouses, everything about the school is geared towards environmental issues. And he invited me to come and speak at Earth Day at this environmental magnet school here in Kansas. First time I've ever been asked to speak on Earth Day. And so I showed up, and I started out every conversation with, many of you are probably wondering why I'm here. And the reason I am here is because I represent the oil and gas industry, and the oil and gas industry has spent more money than the federal government, has spent more money than all other industries have to address environmental issues. We have done more to address environmental issues than any industry on earth. And the reality is our addressing those issues is really making an impact to the point that today we are producing more oil than we've ever produced before. We are utilizing more oil than we've ever used before. And yet our CO2, our methane emissions continue to drop year over year. Life expectancy is at the highest point it's ever been. Infant deaths are at the lowest point that they've ever been. GDP worldwide is at the highest point that it's ever been. Climate-related deaths are at the lowest point that they've ever been in human history. And that all is directly corresponding to the usage of oil and gas, because it provides the energy and it provides the products that enable humanity to protect themselves from the environment, because the environment is always trying to kill you. And we need heat to keep us warm. We need cold to keep us from overheating. We need the clothing. We need the safety equipment. We need the medical equipment that all comes from petroleum that has made those things possible so that we can live successfully within this environment. And I began every single presentation with a speech, depending on grade level, similar to that, that basically said exactly what you're saying, that we are the leading industry in addressing environmental issues. And you're exactly right. It's some of that has been forced by governmental agencies. Some of that has been freely adopted independently by people who just care about the communities they live in. And being a small independent industry like we are here in Kansas, most of our producers, they live in the same community that they pump oil in. They go to the same churches, they go to the same restaurants, and they care, they hunt the same fields. They care about the environment. They care about the water that they're drinking. And so it's a big issue here that we really pride ourselves on the fact that we do it better here in the United States. We produce oil in the most environmentally conscious way, and we do it better than any other place on earth. And if you want to take care of the environment, you want oil and gas produced here because it gives us those resources to protect us from the environment, and we do it in the most environmentally conscious way possible. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's okay because I'm going to kind of wrap up here as well, but I'm looking at, I want two from you, minimum of two, and I'm going to do one surprising one
Okay.
and then one that was like, okay, this is extreme, like kind of the secret unsung hero one. And the one Earth Day advancement innovation that I like to tell people that really surprised me was water recycling, was how much the industry has invested into and the results they've gotten back on water recycling. To me, that they should probably get an award for that and maybe even head the desalination projects that the government tries to continually head up in California to try to get fresh drinking water to the people in California. My guess is they could probably do it in an energy efficient way, but that's all of a sudden political and I don't want to get into that. But the water recycling part is something I wish the industry got more credit for. And then the secret one that I think is one that they should get more credit for, that is the unsung hero, is the rig mats, are those big giant railroad tie looking things that they lay down so it preserves the fauna and it allows spills to be contained right on site. And it's like building a big giant deck on top of where you're going to drill. And that brought like crushed rock and all that other stuff away from that area. And it sped up the reclamation process and it made things more efficiently. It created a new job for individuals. So I like the rig mat story to tell to people and the water recycling. Have you got two that you care to share or examples or companies that stand out in your mind a little bit?
Well, I think the one that stands out in my mind more than anything else are all of the state programs, and they're run through different ways. Here in Kansas, it's run through the KCC, which is a governmental agency. In Oklahoma, it's run through the OERB, which is a nonprofit organization. But in all states have them. But I think one of the unsung heroes is the remediation. We're one of the only industries. You go look at the steel industry. You go look at whatever industry you want to go look at. You drive back into the ancient old parts where there's old steel. You still see factories that are up that no one's taking care of. They're falling down. No one's taking care of them. And we have these remediation programs that have been established in every single state that are going back to oil leases where the lease operators don't even exist. They're not even, most of them aren't even alive anymore. They're abandoned wells or abandoned sites, and these remediation programs that the industry supports and funds, that's funded by the industry, going in and remediating other people's mistakes in order to make our industry as a whole more environmentally conscious, and taking old well sites and doing full remediation of those sites and returning it back to usable agricultural land, returning it back to usable building land to build buildings on. And I think that that one is the unsung hero in all aspects, because when, say, we have a pipeline leak, you will hear stories ad nauseum about how much oil was leaked, how far it spread, what waterways it got into, how it impacted, and then you will hear nothing about the remediation effort that takes place that usually returns the land. It always returns the land to at least as good a quality as it was before, and usually returns it to even better quality than it was before the spill. And you'll hear no stories on that. I think those are both two unsung hero stories. One that takes place for the mistakes of our industry from days gone by, and the other one for how we address when we make a mistake or a mishap happens today, to make things right. And I think that sets us apart as an industry, that we don't pay a fine and move on. We return things to the way they're supposed to be.
And I think that's a really important point too to expand on, because I bring this up a lot, that the Exxon Valdez spill from 40 years ago and the BP one from 20 years ago, those are still cited as examples like they happened last week. And
Right.
they don't ever cite all of the innovation and problem solving that came from that, what they
Right.
learned from that. I mentioned
Right.
I came from agriculture. That was the most deadly industry, probably still is, but they learned from each time, the augers and the different three-wheelers to four-wheelers. And, there was a lot of guinea pig humans out there that nobody ever talked about. Exactly. And I've got
I,
more
I don't know
scars.
how many times I've flipped my three wheeler.
Oh, I wasn't allowed on them anymore. Yeah, I've got scar right
Yeah.
here. And well, when you're trapping gophers, making 50 cents a gopher, and that was your only income as a kid, man, somebody's got to get those Dairy Queen slushies. That's
That's
the way it
right.
goes. But it's interesting that you bring up the remediation and some of those things, because to me that's the innovation part that
Right.
they don't talk about, that they
Right.
rarely talk about. And that's a shame, because that is one of the reasons and one of the examples how the oil and gas industry and their investments into being proactive. That's the
Yeah.
thing. They learn from their mistakes, and then they get proactive to try to prevent any future ones. And if you go every 20 years, where you have a major issue every 20 years, that's a really pretty safe industry. Show me an industry where that happens. It doesn't happen very much. And
And
so,
I'll
go
take it
ahead.
one step further. When I was at this school for Earth Day, the principal, listened to one of my presentations, and I had some breaks in between there, and the principal pulled me aside and he said, "Do you really think that the oil and gas industry is that important in addressing environmental issues?" And I said, "Well, I talked a lot about it from their personal, that it helps protect people. But why don't we do this? Why don't you and I walk around to all the different classrooms where you had nature people that were taking care of birds of prey, and you had waterways people that were working on cleaning up the water, and we went around to the different places, and so we walked into these different rooms, and every room that we walked in, I just pointed out all of the supplies, all of the equipment, all of the clothes that they were wearing to do their job that was made from oil, and just showed him how every single room that he had there as an example of this is how you take care of the environment had objects, tools, supplies, equipment that was dependent upon petroleum in order to do that job. And I think that was really eye-opening to him, is that the innovative part of it is a lot of that innovative and innovation requires petroleum and petrochemicals.
Where are you sending people these days? I know you have your Kansas Strong website, but Glenn Beck and
Yeah,
PBS, you got some different promotions going, or campaigns going, if you will. Uh,
right
talk
now we're
about
sending
talk, yeah, talk about where to send people.
Right now, we're sending people just to Kansas Strong. We're finalizing both of those. We're hoping that by the next time I talk to you, I said that last time, but I'm hoping by the next time that I talk to you to have them up and running and released. We're in the final stages of both of those projects, and so we're down to the finish line. So we're getting very, very close. The Glenn Beck one, we're not going to send people to that. It's going to be that campaign alone, so we can evaluate how much activation we actually get from that campaign. It's kind of a test case for us, but definitely the Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid. We'll be happy to share with you where to go to see that as soon as it's available.
Yeah, we definitely will do our best to send people there as well. Keep me posted on the Glenn Beck test market, if you
Yeah.
will, the focus group, to see how that works. You know, from a marketing standpoint, more than anything,
Yeah.
that's where my interest comes in from that.
Well, I'm intrigued in it as well because I've been in marketing almost all my life, and it's very rare for you to have an opportunity to do a test case where the results are going to be direct results. You always have some overlay between different campaigns and people that Google you and find different things. So the way that we're doing this, we're gonna have a pretty strong indicator of how much this campaign activates people.
Warren Martin is his name. Kansas Strong is the organization. KIOGA finishing up a week of that, as well as getting an award from the Wichita Business Journal for changing the conversation and building a bridge, if you will, to those individuals who might not be having the oil and gas conversation, bringing in a different conversation that seems to be working, an award-winning conversation. There we go. How's that?
There we go. I like that.
Making this stuff up on the fly here, Warren, but
Not quite bobblehead award worthy, but it's award winning.
I have one goal left. You mentioned you had two, right? The bobblehead, and what was the other one again?
Action figure.
Action figure. Bobblehead is one, okay? Same as you. Action figure bobblehead I put under the one category.
Yeah.
The other one is to get on a jumbotron during a sporting event. Okay. And I already have it planned out what I'm going to do. Have you ever been on a jumbotron during a sporting event? Okay.
Yeah, we've sponsored several games as game sponsors, so been on there to get the ball and stuff.
I haven't even gotten that, and I've sponsored things, have been promised to be on the jumbotron, and technical difficulties happened, and I never got on it. And so I wanted to be on it from the crowd. I wanted to be on it from a sponsorship level because I've got it planned. All I'm going to do is I'm going to do my, and then do that and see all the kids go nuts and this and that, and the dads laugh. I got my dad joke ready for what I'm going to be on the jumbotron. Instead of waving at everybody, I'm going to do my magic trick. So, well, that's what it's about, right? It's connected in a new way. It's just figured out a way to stand out in a non-threatening way and say, all right, we just had a experience that was good. Let's go to the next step. So, all right, Warren, we'll be in touch. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you.